Hi class, today we're going to talk Stoicism. Um, as I mentioned in the previous video though, we are approaching fairly big picture. There are many Stoic philosophers, and if you ever get a group of philosophers in a room, you know they don't tend to agree on a lot of things. So uh, even though the Stoicism we're reading is presented by Epictetus, you could kind of think of him as a representative summarizing the commonalities of Stoicism. So of course there are lots of nuanced versions. But this was a very famous, popular, important approach to philosophy, approach to life in early Roman times. Even the Emperor Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic. So there's definitely something to it. And before we get into any of the nuts and bolts of it, I really want to emphasize even if you don't become a full-blown Stoic, you should try some of this stuff. You will be a happier person. I try very hard to be a Stoic in my morning commutes, and we'll talk a little more about that later. So give it some time. It might improve your life some, but we're going to start big picture, and then we're going to talk about and draw attention to some of the key kind of subpoints that Epictetus talks about. So Stoicism, big picture, looking for the good life. The good life, of course, lies in happiness. Um, And so, first and foremost, they're going to have to talk about, well, how do you get happy? And the short answer is unhappiness comes not from things, but from judgments about things, as they tell you in section 5. And so, in order to be happy, we don't focus on those things, and instead we focus only on what is under our control. So, that's kind of the two-part big Stoic tenet there. One, unhappiness comes from judgment, and two, that we attain happiness by focusing on what is under our control. So, first of all, in section 1 is where you get, well, look, some things are up to us and some things aren't. And to be happy, we have to recognize that certain things are outside of our control and don't get upset about it. But here's a really, really, really key thing, giant asterisk in the notes. They have a very precise, nuanced definition of what it means to be something to be up to us or under our control. That is not the way we normally use it in ordinary language. So for the Stoic, something is under our control or up to us if it is entirely unimpeded. It has to be 100%. So here's some examples of things that are not under your control. The fact that you are watching this video. Uh, you might intend to watch the video, but think of all the things that could go wrong. Your internet might be out. I might have forgotten to post it. Might not be able to find it. Could have audio problems. Could have visual problems with your own body or with the computer. And so whether you watch the next video or not is not under your control in the sense of Stoicism. Um, So very, very, very strict definition, and very few things are under our control. So think of whether you get the job you want or not under your control. So instead of the first step in Stoic happiness, then recognize what is not under your control about a given situation. Concede that, and instead focus on what is under your control. Well, given so many things are not under your control, it might be hard to find what is. So, so I've been twitching my hands a lot. That's actually, in a sense, not under my control. Why? Someone might grab my arm and hold it down. I might have some sort of neuropathy that makes me lose control of my hand. I could be amputated, etc. There's an important sense in which what I do with my hand is not even under my control. And the reason I give that example is it makes us realize that all the things that are under our control are up here. So our emotions are under our control. Our judgments are under our control. And that's all you need to be happy, says the Stoic. The things that we need in order to be happy are under our control. And so uh, let's add a little bit more about judgments. As I mentioned, they say, well, it's judgments about things that are bad. So, with what we've learned so far, let's use my example, my morning commute. Back when we had those things, I kind of miss it now. But let's say I'm running a little late, which is not under my control, and I just catch the stupid light red that takes forever to change. So, what's under my control there? Um, so, uh, is the light under my control? Of course not. But when I'm cursing the light, what's really good and bad there? Is a red light a bad thing? A red light is neither good nor bad. It's our judgment. Damn it, I caught the light, or I really needed to catch that green. Those are the things that actually cause the unhappiness. So it's the entire world, everything about the world, including death, by the way, all of those things are A, not under your control, B, they're what you might think of as value neutral. It's neither good nor bad. The red light is neither good nor bad. It's my judgment, damn it, I caught the light, that I'm thinking the red light's bad. But ultimately, it's my judgment, and it's that judgment that gets me upset. If, I'd have just pulled up to the light and said, oh, whatever, it's not under my control. No reason to get upset about it, can't do anything about it. Imagine how much happier I'd be. And so, um, if we're going to be good Stoics and maximize our happiness, we need to avoid that kind of judgment. Recognize it's out of our control, and it is something that is neither good nor bad. It's just there. And when we start having that kind of focus on things, which are under our control, because we're just talking about judgments uh, and our feelings, we can control those with practice. It doesn't come instantly, as Epictetus tells us. With some practice, we can really have a very calm, mellow morning commute. Wouldn't that be nice? As he tells us in section 12, it's just, well, these bad things like catching the red light are just the price of tranquility. Well, if I just accept they're part of this world, then I could remain tranquil. I could remain happy. And he references a couple of other philosophers, including one we talked about, Socrates, as kind of these perfect sages who have figured this out. So that is the big, big, big picture of Stoicism. Focus, recognize what is under your control and what is not. Given that judgments are under our control and bad judgments are what upset people, instead realize the world is judgment neutral and you had no control about whether you caught the light. We're going to talk about a couple big kind of subsections here. The first one coming up is you might have a worry here. If we're talking about the good life and all we're focusing on is our own happiness, isn't that going to lead to kind of this selfishness and not really have any substantive ethics? No, interestingly, not for Stoics. And so it's really important to kind of slowly walk you through, well, if I'm a Stoic and all I'm focusing on is my own happiness, why am I not a greedy a-hole, right? That's an important question. It's a fair question, because we shouldn't really be pursuing paths to the good life that are morally reprehensible. So, given this picture of Stoicism, where does ethics come in? And you get that in section 17. You are assigned a role, and you must play that role skillfully. By the way, it sounds a lot like Jean-Paul Sartre, who we'll read in the next unit. So first of all, what kind of roles are we talking about? Well, I am assigned the role of son, and father and teacher and friend and neighbor and citizen. Citizen of Ohio, citizen of the US, citizen of Shaker Heights. All of those are roles that are, in a sense, I use the word assigned because in the Stoic sense, they're not in my control. So all of these are roles that are assigned to me and are beyond my control. And what are you going to do with that, says the Stoic? Epictetus tells us, well, you're assigned the role, you have to play the role. You must play the role skillfully. And so if you're going to break it down, do it in these steps. All right. Roles are given to us that are not under our control. Step 1. Step 2. Um, these roles entail relationships. This is the part that Epictetus isn't as clear on as you'd like. But think of any role, it comes with relationships. It comes with interactions. So I am assigned the role of neighbor. There's my neighbor over out that bright window, which means I have a relationship with my neighbors over there. I am assigned the role of son. Epictetus gives this example, which means you have a relationship to your parents. I'm assigned the role of citizen of Ohio, which means I have a relationship with other Ohioans, etc. So, roles entail relationships. And since roles are not under our control, relationships aren't under our control either. But wait a minute, and here's the all-important step 3 to get to ethics. Relationships entail duties, a little bit similar to Confucian ideas if you're familiar with Eastern religion and philosophy. I have a relationship with a neighbor, which means I have duties that are involved in being a neighbor. So don't be loud and obnoxious after hours. Don't have my yard looking too hideous. Don't let my garbage blow over there on windy days, that kind of stuff. And this is going to be true of every relationship. Every relationship you have entails duties. The fact that I'm a citizen entails I have a duty to uphold the laws of Ohio, such as not murder. And duties are the primary source of ethics. So basically, here's the steps. I am assigned a role. That's outside of my control, but it gives me relationships. So my relationships are outside of my control, but they give me duties, which means my duties, in a sense, are outside of my control. I just have to uphold my duties. Think of work. You have to do all the stuff you don't really want to do because that's part of the job. And so, kind of this really, actually pretty rich Stoic ethics, based on the duties that fall out of relationships, is very easily derivable in a system where we pursue our own happiness, but not as hedonists, but pursue our own happiness by accepting what is not under our control and focusing on what is under our control. So I just have to accept my duty of neighbor and just do it as part of my job and outside of my control. I don't even waste any thought on thinking, well, should I be a good neighbor or not? It's out of my control. I have to fulfill my neighborly duties. And so that's kind of the key component in Stoic ethics. So make sure you, A, don't misread Stoicism, but B, are familiar with that. So the talk about duties and relationships is in section 30, if you want to check that out. So a couple other kind of good Stoic tips. And really this just all comes out of the basic tenets. Well, is death under our control? Of course not. We all die, no control over that, which means we should refrain from judging it. And that's one thing that really takes some practice. And so in section 21, he'll tell you, well, you have to let death confront you every day. And you might say, that sounds horrible and or morbid, but it's actually a pretty advisable practice. If you want to know how your life's going and if you need to change anything, just think about your death before you go to bed. Like, well, can I say yes to what I've done today and that I'm on the right kind of path or not? Your life will be better, higher quality anyway, if you let death appear before you every day. And this is where some people really, Epictetus kind of loses some people. So he had a hard life, right? So he was a slave who had a messed up leg for a while, and he eventually worked his way all the way up to a very important advisor. But that's why, he talks some about, well, you're assigned a role. You can't. You just have to accept it. He was assigned the role of slave, and he was assigned a role of slave whose leg didn't work. Eventually, something that was outside of his control. When his wife died, that was out of my control as well, and I can't judge it as bad. So sometimes it sounds a little cold, but it is kind of a natural product of the philosophy. So we have this everything outside of us is neutral, but that also means, notice, that influences your interactions with others. So in sections 44 and 45, he talks about, well, we should avoid judgments about others as well. And here's a really interesting thing in the next section. Well, you know what else isn't under your control? Whether I can persuade you to my view. That is, whether I could convince you by argument, by hook or by crook, or by rhetoric or anything else. Whether I persuade you to my side is not under my control either. And so he talks about being a philosopher by example. And again, think of those famous ones he mentioned: Socrates, Heraclitus, Diogenes were all very famous for kind of living their philosophy. If you want to discuss some pretty funny Diogenes anecdotes during the recitation period, I'm happy to do that. Um, but what do all these have in common, in addition to living by example? It's this realizing what has value and this moving away from material things. And so, kind of the last important point I want to hit on today is in section 48, you have this important distinction between philosopher and non-philosopher. And that distinction is where you find your happiness, which is important. Uh, the non-philosopher looks for benefit and harm externally. They look for happiness in shiny stuff and material goods and things like that. Now, why is that a non-philosophical attitude? Simple. It can all be taken away from you. So, if my true happiness is found in my books, um, in the actual physical copies, not the ideas, uh, well, why is that a problem? Because whether I keep those books or not is not under my control. Someone can break in and take them. My house can burn down, etc. And so it's not a very long-sighted uh, view, and it's not a recipe for success to put happiness in something you can't control. Anyone who puts their happiness in something external is surrendering control of their happiness. They're putting it in something that can be taken away. By contrast, the philosopher finds happiness, as we talked about at the beginning, internally. So if we find happiness only in the things that are up to us, that's all limited to up here for the reasons we already talked about. But that also means no one can take it away. And Epictetus had to basically uh, confront possible execution by an emperor. Um, and that didn't bother him because his happiness was not something the emperor could take away. It could take away his life, but that's all. And since he didn't find happiness in things he couldn't control, he was able to walk the walk as well as talk the talk and navigate the situation. We can talk Epictetus anecdotes at the recitation too if you want. There's some interesting ones out there. Anyway, so overall, what does the Stoic do? Look for happiness. How do we find it? By focusing on what can be controlled. What is up to us is things that are 100% up to us that they cannot be taken away. And so we avoid judgments about anything because judgments about the world are outside of our control. Judgments are in our control, but the world is value neutral. It's neither good nor bad, but we make ourselves miserable by judging things that are out of our control as bad. And we make ourselves vulnerable by judging things that are out of our control as good. Happiness comes from not making those kind of judgments. More on this in the recitations. I would love to hear in your discussion boards if you want some examples. Take an everyday situation, talk it through like a Stoic. Well, what's under our control and what's not? What would they say? What should we do? Etc. We will talk to you again next time.